Let's talk about something you probably learned in grade school, a piece of history that feels totally settled. We're going to peel back the layers on a Norse explorer named Leif Erikson and ask a pretty big question. Who really discovered America?
Okay, so let me ask you a question, just a simple one. Picture your old history textbook. Who was the first European to make that epic journey across the Atlantic and land in the Americas?
And if the name Christopher Columbus just popped into your head, well, I've got some news for you. You're not exactly wrong, you're just off. By about half a millennium. Yeah, the real story starts way, way earlier than 1492.
So, if it wasn't Columbus, who was it? Let's meet the guy who actually holds the title. His name was Leif Erikson, a Norse explorer who went by a pretty great nickname, Leif the Lucky.
Born sometime in the 970s, Leif was straight out of the Viking Age. You know, a world of long ships, epic journeys, and even more epic sagas. And his incredible claim to fame? He's now widely believed to be the first European to not just land on, but to actually build a settlement in North America, a place he called Vinland.
So you've got to wonder, right? Where does a guy like this come from? Well, it turns out exploration was basically the family business. Leif was part of a family that was always pushing the boundaries of the known world, sometimes because they didn't have a choice.
His father was the one and only Eric the Red. Now, if you know your Viking history, you know that name. Eric was a larger-than-life character, an explorer who founded the very first permanent Norse colony in Greenland. But here's the thing, he didn't just go there for fun. He was kicked out of Iceland first.
And when you look at the timeline, you see this clear family pattern. First, Eric's own dad gets banished from Norway, so they have to move to Iceland. Then Eric gets himself banished from Iceland for, manslaughter. So what do you do when you run out of places to be banished from? You sail west. And in 986, he set up that first settlement in Greenland, which is where a young Leif would grow up.
Okay, so how on earth do we even know about this incredible journey? Well, the story of Leif's discovery comes to us from two epic medieval Icelandic poems known as sagas. But, and this is a big but, they don't exactly tell the same story.
You have to remember, these sagas were written down about 200 years after all this supposedly happened, passed down for generations as oral stories. So they're part history, part literature. They're not exactly unbiased news reports. And on the biggest detail of all, how Leif even found America, they completely disagree. So on one side, you've got the saga of Eric the Red. This version says it was a total accident. Leif was sailing from Norway to Greenland to spread Christianity when a massive storm blew him completely off course, and he just stumbled upon a new continent. But then you have the saga of the Greenlanders, which tells a completely different story. In that one, another sailor had spotted land years before but didn't bother to check it out. Leif heard the story, got curious, bought the guy's ship, and launched a full-on expedition to find that mysterious western land.
So, what do you do with that? You've got these two amazing but totally different stories. For centuries, this was the big question for historians. Were these sagas just great works of fiction, amazing campfire stories, or were they actually recounting a real historical event?
For the longest time, it was all just talk, just stories. There was no way to know for sure. That is, until the 1960s when a husband and wife team of archaeologists found the physical proof that just changed everything. Way up at the northern tip of Newfoundland in Canada, at this place called Lanzox Meadows, archaeologists uncovered the remains of these old timber and sod buildings. And they looked unmistakably Norse.
So they knew the site was old, but the big question was how old? And just recently, a huge breakthrough in dating technology gave us an answer with mind-blowing precision. The exact date of Viking activity at that site? 1021 AD.
So what scientists did was analyze wood chips, leftovers from building the settlement. By looking at the tree rings and matching them up with a known cosmic ray event from 993 AD, they could literally count the rings forward and pinpoint the exact year those trees were cut down. The evidence was crystal clear. Norsemen were in North America building things in the year 1021, almost 500 years before Columbus even set sail.
Okay, so this is huge, right? This literally rewrites the timeline of global exploration. Which brings up a really big question. Why isn't Leif Erikson a household name like Christopher Columbus? Why didn't his voyage completely reshape the world?
Well, it really comes down to a few key things. For one, the Norse settlements were small and couldn't sustain themselves. The sagas also tell us about violent clashes with the indigenous peoples, who the Norse called Skrælingjar.
So, between hostile locals and a crazy long supply line back to Greenland, the settlements were eventually just abandoned. And over time, the knowledge of Vinland just faded away into myth.
Leif's story pretty much faded away until centuries later. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, immigrants coming to the United States from Scandinavia rediscovered his saga, and for them, he became this incredible symbol of Nordic heritage and a source of huge pride. It was proof that their ancestors were part of America's story right from the very beginning. And this pride, this feeling, it went all the way to the top. In 1925, U.S. President Calvin Coolidge stood in front of a massive crowd and publicly confirmed that, yep, Leif Erikson was indeed the first European to discover America.
And you can actually trace this wave of recognition through the 20th century. A statue goes up in Boston in 1887. Then comes President Coolidge's official declaration in 1925. And finally, in 1964, the U.S. Congress makes it official, creating Leif Erikson Day on October 9th and cementing his place in the American story for good.
So, what's the takeaway here? The story of Leif Erikson is this incredible reminder that history isn't set in stone. An event that should have changed the world was basically lost to time, only to be rediscovered thanks to ancient poems and modern science. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If something this monumental could be forgotten, what else have we gotten wrong? What other big truths are still buried out there, just waiting to be found?